For 500 years, there's been this one short little book that served as a masterclass in power, strategy, and just the brutal realities of leadership. It's a book that made its author's name a synonym for cunning and amorality. I am, of course, talking about The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. All right, let's dive in and see what it really has to say. First things first, we've got to tackle the word this book gave us: Machiavellian. It's a label we hear thrown around all the time, right? Usually to describe some politician or CEO who's just ruthless. But is that fair? Is that the whole story? Just think about it for a second. When you hear that word, what pops into your head? Deceit? Betrayal? A total disregard for morality just to get what you want? Yeah, you're not alone. That is absolutely the popular image. And, while those descriptions aren't totally off base, they kind of miss the entire point. Machiavelli wasn't writing a how-to guide for psychopaths. He was writing a pragmatic, almost scientific breakdown of what it takes to get, and more importantly, to hold on to power, all for the good of the state. The truth, as we're about to see, is way more interesting. So, to really understand his thinking, we need to get a handle on two key concepts that are at the absolute heart of this book. For Machiavelli, all of politics is basically a battle between fortuna and virtù. Let's start with Fortuna. This is the Roman goddess of luck, and for Machiavelli, she represents everything outside of a ruler's control. We're talking economic crises, natural disasters, what other countries are doing, a global pandemic. That's all Fortuna. He pictures her as this raging river, one that could just sweep everything away in a flood of chaos. So how do you fight a raging river? You fight it with virtue. Now, and this is super important. This isn't virtue in the moral sense of, being a good person. For Machiavelli, virtue is this blend of skill, courage, decisiveness, and just pure force of will. It's the leader's ability to see the flood coming, to build dams and levees, and to redirect that river of fortuna in their favor. So the whole game is this eternal tug of war. A great prince, in Machiavelli's eyes, is someone who uses their virtù to tame the wild, unpredictable nature of fortuna, protecting their state from chaos and ruin. See, it's not about being good or evil, it's about being effective. Now, all this sounds a little theoretical, right? Well, Machiavelli wasn't just a philosopher, he was a student of history. So let's see how these ideas play out in the real world, with two case studies he uses to hammer his point home. One spectacular failure, and one chillingly effective success. First up, the failure. King Louis XII of France, who swept into Italy with great success, but then lost his new territories almost as fast as he won them. Machiavelli basically holds him up as the perfect example of what not to do. Just look at this checklist of mistakes. Every single one is a lesson. By getting rid of the weaker, local rulers, he destroyed potential allies. By making the Pope stronger, he created a powerful rival. By bringing Spain into the mix, he invited another huge predator to the table. And by not living there or sending his own people, he never actually put down roots. You can see echoes of these blunders today, can't you? When a nation pushes away its traditional allies in a region, only to watch a rival power fill the vacuum. He completely failed to use virtù, and fortuna washed him away. And now, for the success story. And this is where things get pretty dark. Machiavelli's primary model for princely virtù is the infamous Cesare Borgia, a man known for his absolute ruthlessness. Okay, so check out this strategy. The province of Romagna was lawless and chaotic, so Borgia sends in his hatchet man, this guy D'Orco, to just brutally crush all opposition. Once the dirty work was done and the people absolutely hated D'Orco, what did Borgia do? He had him cut in half and put on display in the town square. Think about that in modern terms. A leader uses a controversial figure to push through an unpopular but necessary policy. Then that figure is thrown under the bus, allowing the leader to look like the one who restored order. The goal is achieved and the blame gets shifted. It's brilliant, in a terrifying way. And this just perfectly illustrates the point. As Machiavelli writes right here, Borgia's cruelty wasn't for its own sake. It was a calculated political act, a tool he used to achieve a very specific end, a peaceful, stable, and well-governed state. It was a masterful display of virtue. This brings us to perhaps the most famous and debated question in the entire history of political philosophy, one posed directly by Machiavelli himself. So, what do you think? I mean, in a perfect world, you'd want both, wouldn't you? To be a beloved and respected leader. But Machiavelli lived in the real world, a world of constant warfare and betrayal. He knew that sometimes you have to choose. And there it is, one of the coldest, most influential sentences ever written. It is much safer to be feared than loved. Just let that sink in for a moment. So why did he believe this? Well, his logic is built on a pretty grim assessment of human nature. Love, he argues, is held together by a chain of obligation that people, being fickle, will break whenever it suits them. But fear? Fear is held in place by a dread of punishment that never, ever fails. A feared ruler might not be popular, but his power is secure. Okay, so after all this talk of fear and cruelty and deception, what is the ultimate lesson of The Prince? What's the final takeaway here? The bottom line is this: Machiavelli arguing that a prince plays by a different set of rules than an ordinary citizen. His number one job, his highest moral calling, is to preserve the state. This is the very definition of sovereignty, the absolute power of the state to govern itself. And for Machiavelli, the prince is the final guarantor of that sovereignty. This is the real heart of his philosophy. A lie that prevents a disastrous war is a good lie. A swift, surgical act of cruelty that prevents a long, bloody civil war is a good act. It forces us to ask some really uncomfortable questions about modern statecraft. Is it acceptable for intelligence agencies to use deceptive tactics to stop a terrorist attack? For Machiavelli, if the action preserves the state, the answer is a clear and simple yes. And that brings us to our final thought. Machiavelli wrote this 500 years ago, describing the politics of Renaissance Italy. But when you look at the world today, at leaders navigating crises, making tough calls, and balancing national interest against personal ethics, you have to ask yourself, have the fundamental rules of power really changed at all?